when they do their thinning projects, when you thin out the canopy, all of those understory shrubs are going to grow more rapidly than they did before. So if their goal is to remove quote unquote ladder fuels, as they call it, that is those shrubs and brushes, which are going to grow more rapidly after they remove the canopy. So the only way that they can really make these projects feasible without having to do it year after year after year is to use herbicides.
Welcome, Wild Ones. I'm Josh Schlossberg, host of the Green Root Podcast, the official podcast of Eco Integrity Alliance, where we're on a quest to uncover the roots of the ecological crisis. Our guest this week is Melissa Soderston. Melissa is a forest advocate living in the Lake Tahoe basin of California. She's president of Tahoe Forest Matters and Congress of Climate. She's also the California advocate for Eco Integrity Alliance. Welcome back to the Green Root Podcast.
Hey, Josh, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Of course. Well, you've been super busy in California, and there is a lot going on in your neck of the woods. So, without any more preamble, tell us what's going on out there and what you folks are doing about it and how people can help.
Yeah, so I am based here in South Lake Tahoe, California. It's part of the Lake Tahoe Basin. And we have been dealing with just a lot of forestry issues, lots of logging, lots of thinning under the guise of fire safety. And now we are faced with the use of glyphosate as well as four other pesticides potentially in the Lake Tahoe Basin watershed. This is, in 2021, we had the Caldor fire, which burned in El Dorado, Amador, and Alpine counties, primarily El Dorado County. And it was actually the first fire to burn over the Sierra Crest into the Lake Tahoe Basin area. And there was a lot of speculation as to whether Myers, California, and South Lake Tahoe, California itself was at risk of burning during this fire. Luckily, my home and South Lake Tahoe itself was left unscathed. However, there was the town of Grizzly Flats, which was completely decimated by the fire, and it ended up burning about 200,000 square miles, a very big area. And now we are at the supposed restoration phase of the project, which is 156,000 acres. It encompasses additional thinning of, snag trees, those that were killed during the fire, which are now being used by many, many wildlife as homes. Those are going to be removed, as well as additional thinning of the green remaining strands of trees, supposedly to protect them. And now the use of glyphosate has been confirmed. We did manage to get them to say that they will not be using it this year within the Tahoe Basin portion of the Caldor fire burn scar. But that is a very small portion of the burn scar itself. They have already been spraying glyphosate on some of our local ski resorts, such as Sierra at Tahoe. There was a significant project to thin almost every remaining tree from their ski resort, and they have sprayed massive amounts of glyphosate there. We have seen thinning underneath our utility corridors. Up to 1,000 feet around those utility corridors are being thinned and sprayed with glyphosate, and we are just watching native plant colonies, fungal colonies be decimated. And all of this is going on during nesting season and foraging season when our bears are waking up from hibernation, and really been a tragic couple weeks. Yeah, so that's the basic gist of it. Lots of logging, lots of thinning, and poisoning of our Lake Tahoe watershed.
So, what's new in my mind is that they are coupling the quote fuel reduction logging, what some of us call wildfire pretext or wildfire pretense logging, with herbicide spraying. Here in Colorado, I haven't heard of that much. I know that they do some herbicide stuff for some, I believe it's gambrel oak, but I don't know if that's directly tied into cutting. So is that something that's unusual? Have I just missed that? Is this new?
I think that it has flown under the radar a lot in California. It has actually, I would say, probably for the last decade or so, has been not necessarily used on all of the projects, but it has been considered for almost every thinning project. Most of California's landscape is, I live here in the forest of Lake Tahoe. We're ponderosa pine and, western yellow pine, all the good pine trees here. But a lot of our area is just chaparral. It's, sagebrush, manzanita, and the lower growing brushes that they have deemed to be such a threat. And unfortunately, these are the food sources for all our animals and stuff. And when they do their thinning projects, when you thin out the canopy, all of those understory shrubs are going to grow more rapidly than they did before. So if they're goal is to remove quote unquote ladder fuels, as they call it. That is those shrubs and brushes, which are going to grow more rapidly after they remove the canopy. So the only way that they can really make these projects feasible without having to do it year after year after year is to use herbicides. Normally, it's done with hand spraying. We're not doing aerial spraying, as far as I am aware, but even hand spraying is very detrimental over, 156,000 acres is a very big project area. And unfortunately, a lot of this is not even pine forest. It is chaparral, manzanita, scrub, and oak woodland, which if you're familiar with oak, they can take maybe a decade, but most oak species will actually resprout from the roots and their trunks after a fire, after a disturbance, after even being cut down, they will regrow. But if they're going through and they're removing these snags and they're bringing heavy equipment and herbicides into this landscape and then replanting what I assume will be primarily pine trees. Um, Fortunately, a lot of sugar pines, which are not necessarily a logging frenzy thing, but um, these oak trees, which, these are 800-year-old trees, the lifeblood of California, they're ecosystems in themselves full of microorganisms and invertebrates and mosses and just homes for so many animals. They will regrow after fire, but not if we go through and log and spray them with herbicide. So just really tragic. We've seen a lot of growth already in these areas. We're now 5 years after this fire. Even 3 years after the fire, we had just the proliferation of woodpeckers and small mammals through the area. The deer were enjoying it, and all of our native wildlife and flora was regenerating like really rapidly in ways that I've never seen. Some wildflowers that I haven't seen in 2 decades of living in the Tahoe Basin were sprouting after this fire. And it was really just a beautiful thing to see, nature doing what it does best, taking care of itself. And, it's hard enough for it to recover after a disturbance during these rapidly changing climate issues that we're facing. And when we're going through and logging them just as they're starting to recover from this fire disturbance, there's no way that these native colonies of plants are going to recover. We're going to have planted seedlings evenly spaced, which are likely going to bake in the sun with no protection from snag trees standing. And, our native bushes will be pushed out. We'll have lots more grasses infiltrating and likely never see the forest recover to what it was before the fire. Whereas if they would just leave it alone, it would do just fine on its own.
Yeah, that's a real bummer, but it's good to know the details of this. And I think the one silver lining of situations in which maybe we're not able to stop things, hopefully we are, but when we're not, we can use it as an example to prevent further degradation and destruction because we all know they don't just come into an area one time. They want to be in there for the long haul. And I'm curious, has there been any invasion after any logging of things like cheatgrass or other plants like that?
Yeah, the Tahoe Basin is already seeing a good infiltration of invasive species here. It's funny because our forest manager couldn't even tell you what the invasives versus natives are in the forest. He's more interested in recreation sites, but I think that's probably a conversation for another day. But off of the hill, when you go over the Sierra Crest down into the foothill area, that's almost entirely cheatgrass at this point, which is what drove a lot of this fire in the first place. I grew up down there, and there was Sierra Pacific actually had a timber facility in the area. When I was a kid, we managed to get that shut down years ago, probably more for economic reasons than our actual efforts. But so there was a lot of timberland interspersed within the national forest already, which, as we all know, those timber strands are the perfect fuel for those fires. The natural forest would not burn nearly as hot if it wasn't interspersed with those timber plots. So yeah, there's cheatgrass already there, and we see every time that they build a new road into the forest for these logging projects, they're not cleaning the equipment to any kind of standard. There's nobody supervising to ensure that they're cleaning their equipment, so they are just tracking these grass seeds further into these wilderness areas, and it's a really big problem.
Yes, so the logging brings in cheatgrass. And here's this strange chain I noticed recently. I'd be curious what your take is on this. So I went on a field trip recently to, it's a county called Chaffee County, which is in south central Colorado. It's on the west slope, so it's a lot drier than on this side, even though all of Colorado is pretty dry. And this was a field trip that was organized by Center for Biological Diversity, which we're really happy they're engaged with that. Fella Joe Stone, who is he's engaged with an organization called Forest Service Employees for Environmental Ethics. He's kind of our Chaffee County contact here in Colorado. The scientist, Dr. Tom Veblen, who has put out a lot of studies on concerns with, well, the impacts, let's just say, of fuel reduction, logging, the lack of effectiveness, and in many cases, the fact that there is no need for that. So there was this field trip to some previous fuel reduction as well as some areas that they plan to do it. These were even up to 11,000 feet. So they're logging up to 11,000 feet in Colorado. I mean, that's like tree line. It's literally up to tree line to the alpine. Anyway, in one of these areas, there was all of this cheatgrass, and this person is I forget exactly her position, but she does landscaping and even some forestry contracting, and she was pointing out how terrible these fuel reduction projects are, how pointless it is. She's saying, like, I can have my blowtorch out here and blowtorch this tree. It's not going to catch on fire. But you see this grass and this cheat grass. And so it was filled with all of this cheat grass. And so then when I came back and I drove back, I stopped at this area called Beaver Ranch Park in this county called Jefferson County in Colorado, which is the most aggressive logging county in all of Colorado. It's awful. We led a hike out to this area before in advance. We were trying to get some traction. We were just ignored. We were silenced. We were censored, blacklisted, blah, blah, blah. So they logged it. I was driving past. I'm like, I'm gonna have to see. I'm gonna be putting out a video soon with all the carnage. But I found cheatgrass there as well now that I can identify it. And here's the point I wanted to make. So what we have is the agencies who have done fire suppression for not as long as people think. Effective fire suppression's really only been since World War II with planes, but people say about a century of it. Why were they doing fire suppression? Because they don't want the timber trees to burn because they want to be able to sell it. So that's why they were doing fire suppression. That's why we're still dropping usually young men, but young people into backcountry forests as firefighters to die. It's pretty terrible. But anyway, fire suppression. Okay, and then they come up with their reason. Well, because of that fire suppression we have to log. Now we know that that reasoning is garbage, but that's their argument. And then they log, and then they bring in these invasive plants. Like, well, I guess we have to use herbicides or just this will grow back with understory. No shit. So we have to use herbicide. And then you can take it even further. And this is going, a little further afield from the logging industry, but then people will very likely, or at least possibly, become ill from this. And then there is this whole, well, the treatment of the people who got ill from this whole process that was unnecessary to begin with. So in my mind, they've set up a pipeline of just busy work for themselves to do. They keep wrecking everything. They're like, I guess we need more funding to fix the things we keep wrecking. Do you feel like that's accurate?
Oh yeah, I mean it's absolutely accurate. It is big business here in California, especially. I mean, we've been doing it for decades and decades, and all of the agencies are involved. There's huge grants available, and we have companies that are coming from Ohio, Colorado, Canada, and they're logging our forests here in Lake Tahoe, California. If it's no money involved, then how come people are coming from all over the country to log here? So, I mean, there's a lot of money involved, and they're kind of in this catch 22 is that they have all of this infrastructure in place for them to do this work now. And if they just say, oh, our bad, we're not supposed to be doing this, and they stop, then where do you put all those jobs? Where do you put all the infrastructure? Where do you put all the people? And unfortunately, a lot of people here kind of demand the work to be done because these agencies have given them a false sense of security that if they just thin enough out in the forest, they'll be safe from a fire. And we've seen it time and time again. We saw it in Paradise, California. We saw it during the Caldor fire in Grizzly Flats. Part of their community had already been thinned, and we've seen it in Los Angeles. We saw it in Hawaii and Texas. Every example shows us that it doesn't matter how sparse the vegetation is. You could have primarily grass, and communities are still going to burn if we're not focusing on that, home hardening and infrastructure hardening aspect of it. And unfortunately, we see billions of dollars going to logging and now poisoning our forests, and we can't get a simple grant to do defensible space work in our communities. So, yeah, it is a really big issue.
Yeah, what I'm noticing is that the funding goes to at the very best case scenario, the lowest priority stuff. In many cases, in terms of this logging, a thing that does nothing or can actually make the situation worse. Here in Colorado, right now, so they want to build this road not far from my neighborhood, supposedly as this egress. And so at first I'm like, okay, I get it. But then I'm looking at it more and more, and through mature forest. It would go all the way into the forest to come back to double around, just kind of absurd sort of things. And not that all egress roads are silly, but in this case, this doesn't seem feasible. And yet we had a fire in our town that burned down a third of the town. It came from the town. It came from what is probably a gas leak inside of a building that was like a unit that was abandoned. So they're looking for the forest. It's going to burn. It happened in the town. And so what was funny is people were like, well, we need to get a better early warning system. So they're talking about sirens. The grant for sirens was denied. So like something that's pretty much the low-hanging, obvious thing to do, there's no money for it. If you say logging or building what might be a tens of millions of dollar road to nowhere, they're like, we got the money for it. So it's just so frustrating that it's really not, in my opinion, I don't think these people want people's homes to burn down. I just don't think they really care about it as much as they claim to.
Yeah, they don't want to give up. I mean, it sounds so horrible to say, but they don't want to give up the money, and they've been given a lot of money. Congress gave the Forest Service a ton of money and demanded that they do this work. And unfortunately, we're not seeing any results. We're seeing our forests getting hotter and drier. Fires are still occurring. A lot of our forests are in a fire deficit. Fire is actually essential part of these ecosystems, and especially a high intensity burn forest is some of the most biodiverse forests you're going to find out there. It is a flush of wildflowers that you don't see outside of that time shortly after fire. You see, rodent colonies being built. So lynx will use it. You know, smaller mammals will hunt in there. The raptors come in, and woodpeckers. I mean, it's vital. Those stands are vital, and that's just a disappearing habitat. And we saw this last week they posted a video of a project that they're doing in, I live in the El Dorado National Forest. Even though I'm in the Tahoe Basin, it's the El Dorado National Forest here. But in the Tahoe National Forest, which is actually north of where I'm here, they were doing a thinning project, and what they were doing was they took a bulldozer to the bottom of this very, very steep slope where you've never been able to log before. It's a lot of old growth in there because the slope was too steep to ever have been logged in the past. And they took the bulldozer to the bottom, and they took another crane of some sort to the top of the mountain, and they actually winched the bulldozer up the mountain so that they could clear this like 1,000 foot fire line on the middle of this super steep slope, nowhere near anyone's homes. They built two dirt roads into the forest just to clear a path through this slope, not providing any protection to our communities here. And we still don't have proper evacuation routes. We don't know what would happen if there was a fire that came from two directions into the Tahoe Basin, because we would be trapped. We only have, one way out in either direction, and we're not solving those problems. We're not burying our utility lines. We still have drop lines going from our utility poles to our houses, which are a huge ignition point during a wind event. Branches falling on that drop line, those could easily be buried, and they're just not doing any of those basic maintenance things. We're just logging and poisoning the forest. And then we're not seeing the results. Our town is no safer. We still have wood shingle roofs. We still have branches growing through every power line here. We have transformers that are exploding in every wind event. It's a regular thing here, and we've watched people be burned alive in their cars trying to evacuate from these fires because we're not building proper evacuation routes. We don't have proper fire services here. We have very understaffed and underfunded fire departments. So, but the focus is all on logging and thinning. Here in California, everybody thinks we're super environmentally conscious, but in the California Assembly right now, they are trying to push California Senate Bill 1370, which would exempt all logging and herbicide use, as long as they label it for fire protection, it would exempt it from any environmental review. So CEQA is the California Environmental Quality Act. Most of these major projects are required to go through very strenuous environmental reviews. And if the Senate bill passes, it's actually in the Natural Resources Committee in California right now. It would exempt all of those logging and herbicide projects from CEQA. So they are doing everything they can to just push out these projects as fast as they possibly can, to the detriment of entire ecosystems.
Yeah, one of the most frustrating things that we get here in Colorado is people saying, "Oh, so we want to be just like California where they haven't done any forest management." And I tell them, like, California has managed the hell out of its forest. It has over managed its forest. And right now, I mean, there's some of the biggest logging projects in the country are in California. So it's this kind of thing where it doesn't really matter what the facts are. The way I framed this in this recent piece I had written was they have, as in the folks who are advocating for this stuff, the logging proponents, the resource extractors, they have story, not an accurate story, something based on a few kernels of truth. They have a story and then they have status, right? They have government, they have elected officials, they have big names, whatever, people who are making money for the community. And we have science and we have substance to our arguments, but that doesn't make a lick of a difference compared to the story and the status. So what I'm saying is, great, we got the science. Great, we got the substance. That never matters in a debate. If you've ever debated somebody who you just know is wrong, but they're just like, well, talking point or bumper sticker, there's no real way to defeat that. But if we come up, I think, with a better story that is based on the science and substance, and we get more folks with status to engage in this and speak out, like some of the larger organizations, maybe that can start turning the tides. But I'm curious because you had mentioned that it does seem like more and more folks in your community are concerned about some of this. Obviously, a lot of people have bought the Kool-Aid. It's psychologically comforting to think that, oh, my government's doing the thing that's going to protect me rather than doing the things that actually matter, which is home for hardening and defensible space. And like you said, being aware of, evacuation routes or early warning systems, etc. So would you say that there is at least some groundswell of folks who are getting on board with some of the concerns?
Yeah, I've been doing this work here for a really long time. I've been super hyper focused on the forest issues for probably the last decade now. And finally, since the Caldor fire, and especially in the last 2 years or so, I am finally starting to see people that are realizing how destructive these projects really are. And everybody up here hikes. We all love to hike and take our dogs out everywhere. Everybody has like 2.5 dogs in Tahoe instead of kids. So everybody's out there on the trails all the time, and we're just watching the destruction happen in real time in our backyards, in our favorite places. And that has really helped draw attention to it. People were still skeptical and, well, maybe it'll keep us safe. Trying to get um, a lot of there's been a lot of articles lately that have um, pushed against the narrative of the Forest Service. So that has been super helpful. We've been really active with our local media here, trying to get them more engaged, and really just comes down to some of us writing a lot of op-eds and getting those published in the smaller newspapers. But this glyphosate thing, the thought of people poisoning our forests, and you say Roundup, that's what glyphosate is. For those that don't know, it is the active ingredients in Roundup, which I thought was banned. Um, that has really been the catalyst that has pushed everybody over the edge to say, like, look, everything you're saying is part of this same narrative, and if this can't be true. There's no way that poisoning the environment can be an effective way to mitigate fire. And people have really put their foot down about it. And they are starting to question the entire narrative, which has been really wonderful. So you're right. Getting people out there into these spaces and seeing firsthand what happens. We can spew science at people all day long, and I just people don't want to hear it. But when you take them out, and we've had 5 years now, we've taken them out. The very first year after the fire, we've taken them at 3 years, and now we're at 5 years. And getting people out there and seeing these landscapes as they progress and as they, regrow after this fire. You can't think of the fire as like the end game. You have to think of that as the starting point for the forest. Those old growth forests, that is the final point for the forest. That is the final form that it will ever reach is that old growth forest. So a fire isn't destroying something; it's starting something over and starting something new. So it has been really powerful to get people out there to see what's actually growing after the fire and how many saplings are already just it's everywhere. I mean, there's so many trees growing already, and they're only this big, but 10 years from now, they're going to be taller than my house. And to get people out there and then to say, look, this is what they want to poison. These are the birds that are nesting in these areas that are using these shrubs that are growing. And this ceanothus that hasn't grown here for a decade, I've never seen it in this area. And now it's regrowing. There's manzanita here that we haven't seen for decades that's regrowing. People see that, and that is really impactful. And if we could get the policymakers out there into the forest with us, I think that they hopefully would see the same thing that we see. So yeah, that's where we're at. We are finally making progress here in Tahoe, but clearly we still have a long way to go when it comes to these agencies.
Yeah, and it's similar here in Colorado. We're making progress. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And one of the most frustrating things is we are seeing the agencies pull back on some of their rhetoric. So that's not the frustrating part. Like they're actually, in some ways, that we've cornered them on their two main talking points, which are absolutely false. Their two main talking points for everything are this logging is going to protect your communities. Wrong. Incorrect. Fuel reduction isn't even meant to do that. I have some Forest Service studies that say, no, that's not why we do that. And then reducing high severity wildfire, also false. Weather and wind driven, wrong, incorrect. Their own science shows that those are the two main talking points they've used. And so they poison the dialogue with that. They are saying those a little less, the government agencies, at least here in Colorado, and I've seen the Forest Service. But the problem is they've already put forth that brain rot, and everyone else is still propagandizing the same thing. So you go on social media, it's just everyone, and you follow these people, they're almost always financially linked, almost always. I would say like 90% of the time, but they're out there just putting out complete propaganda. We better log this so your home doesn't burn down. You want to stop the biggest fires, we have to log this. So the things that the Forest Service isn't even really saying anymore, they're benefiting from all of this. And I think they're glad. Meanwhile, if like Eco Integrity Alliance is saying, yeah, we don't believe in fuel reduction in public lands. We have some of our own environmentalists, not in our organization, but saying, well, but maybe in the pond. And it's like, we're like splitting hairs on this. We're not even allowed to make a declaration that, well, we don't think that this experiment should be done on public lands. Meanwhile, their side is just people, telling all sorts of lies. The Forest Service isn't going, excuse me, sir, but you better pull back on the rhetoric. They love that rhetoric. And that's just what's really, really frustrating. But a couple other things I wanted to get into regarding the herbicides. So I was just looking at a photo of Lake Tahoe, and I mean, that is the water. I mean, that is like the most beautiful instance, one of the most, at least arguably, beautiful instances of just an incredible watershed. So I'm listening to a book on tape from Mark Twain right now, and he was talking about Lake Tahoe back in the maybe the 1890s and how incredible and everything it is. So that's just world known as an incredible body of water. Yet here they want to spray herbicides. Do you think that's part of a way that people can push back against this?
Yeah, I mean, that has been just so helpful to those of us that are trying to protect the forests here. In a strange way, having them announce their use of glyphosate openly has really upset a lot of people. We are a international tourist destination. People come from all over the globe to visit Lake Tahoe, and we don't have indoor activities here. The reason people come here is to enjoy the outdoors, to go hiking in our forests and up our mountains, mountain biking, to go skiing during the winter, and of course the lake. And we've got some great watersheds here. The entire basin is basically a watershed that all runs into these important recreation areas. And people are absolutely horrified to think that herbicides, especially glyphosate, which we all know is a well known carcinogen, cancer causing agent, has been banned almost entirely across the globe, except in the United States. For anyone who pays attention, they actually tried to push additional glyphosate use without environmental review in the Farm Bill this year to encourage it. And um, unfortunately, for those of you that are wondering, this is not a new thing for the Tahoe Basin. Almost every one of the thinning projects that has been approved in the basin for the past decade or so has been approved with some level of potential herbicide use. It is used regularly on restoration projects up here. This is just the first time that they have announced it so openly. So yeah, it is really horrifying for people to think that they're going to come here and go skiing on a mountain that was just recently poisoned. They just finished that project. Mother Jones actually did a report on it. Not totally 100% on their report because they did promote still some of the same old thinning nonsense. But they sprayed the entire Sierra at Tahoe ski resort. So that means everybody that's going to be out there this summer is going to be, or hiking this summer is going to be hiking on that stuff. And if you're skiing this winter, it's going to be all in that snowpack. Just a lot of poison and doesn't go away. A lot of forever chemicals in these herbicides. So yeah, just not good in any way.
Yeah. And would you say that the larger conservation groups are helpful on this issue, nowhere to be found, or on the wrong side of the issue?
Well, it's interesting because I'm with you that like the Forest Service has actually, and our local fire department, everybody has had to back off of the narrative that this is going to save our communities. We do still hear it from them, but the primary driver of this narrative is no longer the Forest Service themselves. It is actually these nonprofits and our planning agencies up here are probably the biggest issue for us. We have the Tahoe Regional Planning Agency, which is actually a bi state compact meant to protect Lake Tahoe and its watersheds, gets millions of dollars funded through Congress every single year to protect our watersheds. They are fully on board for this herbicide use. And we have them supporting the thinning as well. And then we have the Nature Conservancy here, another one. What it comes down to is that who is getting the grant money from Congress is the Forest Service is given these huge chunks of grant money to pass out to people for these various projects. So if you want that grant money, you kind of have to fit their narrative. And we found that the Nature Conservancy and UC Davis, unfortunately, one of the universities here in California, well known for their research, great programs there. But they have taken tons of grant money from the Forest Service to promote these projects. And that is actually our biggest pushback right now is from groups like the Nature Conservancy, who, by the way, are also on board with killing wolves in California to protect livestock. So yeah, that's a really big issue for us. And you deal with these smaller groups of people, smaller nonprofits, smaller green groups like Eco Integrity Alliance. It's usually just a handful of people that are doing a ton of good work. And then you have these big, major, what I consider a corporation at this point with the Nature Conservancy. You have, multi-$100,000 salaries for their staff and stuff, and they're really just feeding this nonsense back into the community, and it's really hard to compete with somebody that's been around for that long and really has this huge platform and has the respect of all of your representatives in Congress are going to clearly represent or respect people from UC Davis or the Nature Conservancy, and it's really difficult.
Yeah, and not just the influence, it's the funding. So the Nature Conservancy has a $1.8 billion annual budget. They have gotten about $500 million over the last several years for schemes on public lands. They log on public lands. They are pushing ranching on public lands. I believe entities like that get to exist in the world, right? I think that they should have a perspective. They're a working lands entity, but they should not be masquerading as an environmental group, as a conservation group, and no one should consider them as a conservation group. So there is a reason why some of us, or let's just say me on the Green Root podcast, constantly harp on the Nature Conservancy. They're one of the biggest threats we have right now to wildlands and wildlife protection. Just hands down. It doesn't mean there aren't good folks inside those organizations. I know of some of them, but what they're doing overall is similar to the agencies. They're good folks inside the agencies, but they become these behemoths and they are putting out just flat out disinformation. And here in Colorado, they are funding a ballot measure that would get more money for more logging with no benchmarks, no safeguards for no clear cutting or old growth logging, roadless areas, all that stuff. anything they want. And in these other conservation groups, Western Resource Advocates, which is Westwide, and Conservation Colorado, these big, they have all these employees and stuff like that. They are pushing logging, and it's like, okay, but just say that you are a working lands or an extraction based. Just stop saying you're a conservation group because that greenwash is so dangerous. But I pulled up something from the Nature Conservancy where this was a piece on California. And I mean, it is disinformation. Now there are areas in which we can disagree. We have opinions on such and such. That's all fine. When there's something I disagree with, I don't call it disinformation. But what they're saying here is that what is the piece is basically stopping mega fires with quote thinning. So the title is Stopping Mega Fires in California. You don't stop mega fires. There's no such thing as a mega fire anyway, but the high severity, which is the mixed severity fire, which is, you know, low, moderate, and high severity fire, natural, essential. You cannot stop them with tree cutting. We all know this to be true. Yet, so these NGOs get to keep lying because they're not really accountable the way a government is. And yeah, I'm reading through this. It took 100 years to destroy the health of Sierra forest. We can restore our forests in mere decades. Just like explode into infernos that destroy them. So I write fiction, so I understand the use of powerful verbs, and they're just intentionally being hysterical and making false they're just making false statements. And then they have this photo that supposedly proves something. And they have an area where it's thinning and prescribed fire. And you see that these trees are mostly green. Then on the left, you see thinning only and it's burned, and then no treatment and it's burned more severely. And then you're like, case closed. And it's like you look a little closer and you're like, okay, hold on a second. All right. So there's a road that is protecting this. So like there's basically this big gap of this road, which clearly prevented the fire from jumping over there, had nothing to do with the treatment. And then you even look in the treatment area, you can see the trees are a lot younger. It almost looks like a plantation forest. So I don't believe anything they say at this point. You can obviously pick and choose different areas in the landscape, but I'm finding that close to 100% of the things that they say are at least partially inaccurate. Like they can't make one statement that is totally true. Doesn't mean that there is everything they're saying is false, but yeah, they're saying ecological forest restoration, which I mean, even that is false. So we just spoke with Dr. Thomas Veblen. He's somebody who has researched these things for quite a while. He says there is a very huge difference between fuel reduction and then some form of, let's just say, ecological forest restoration. I'm dubious of pretty much all of those. To me, ecological forest restoration is busting up the logging roads that were there and returning it to the forest. That's ecological restoration. But they're lumping it together, which is just a falsehood. And then they're saying can significantly reduce the risk of megafires. No, it can't. It actually can't. So here we have this $1 billion entity that is just lying to people. And we have these nice people. I mean, I picture, you know, an older woman with the calendar of the Nature Conservancy who sends in her $35 to them every month because they call it, they say preserving nature, you know, saving nature, preserving life, something like that. And it's like neither. Anyway, so that was my mini tirade on the Nature
I
Conservancy.
agree with you too, and it's funny because like we all mock the commercials for the certain pet charity that has the commercials all the time. We all mock it as knowing that they're just scamming elderly people out of money. But then when it comes to the environmental NGOs, people don't really question whether they care about the environment or not, or whether they're doing it for some other reason. And I fully believe that there's a ton of people that are involved with the Nature Conservancy and some of these other big green groups. They're great people that
Yes.
really think they're doing wonderful things, that are out there doing wonderful things.
Yes.
However, the overall messaging has just been completely co opted by this whole logging narrative, and it's absolute nonsense. And they know it's nonsense, but like I said before, the only grant money is coming out of these agencies like the Forest Service, and if you're not fitting their narrative, you're not gonna get those big grants. And the incentives are absolutely there for them. They have
Mm.
many people aren't aware that they actually run like a dude ranch thing that's totally geared towards cattle ranching. And I grew up in farm country. I love ranchers. I have total respect for people that are doing that work. It is awful, backbreaking, really hard work. Most of them don't really appreciate what's being done to our public lands through these ranchers, however, because they're given, um, they get to put those cows on our public lands for a very small amount of money. And the ranchers that are out there doing the work are kind of offended by it because it is giving them a bad name too. So even most of the ranching community is not a huge fan of cattle on public lands. They're not a huge fan of thinning on public lands or prescribed fire on public lands because a lot of those in the farming communities are often hunters as well. And it destroys their ability to go out and hunt on our public lands. There's a lot of reasons for it, and unfortunately, the Nature Conservancy has really they are my least favorite as well, and it's unfortunate because I spent a lot of time when I was a kid supporting groups like that. I got my Ranger Rick magazines in the mail when I was a kid and was really into supporting all of these NGOs and, writing letter campaigns for them and signing all their petitions and stuff. And then as you start to interact with them more and more and realize that they aren't often engaged with the land that they are supposedly supporting. Most of the time, there's nobody in the area where these projects are being conducted. They're just taking the grant money and putting it into the hands of contractors, and it is really sad and unfortunate. I think once anybody gets so big, though, we all know that. Like, why do we need a trillionaire? Why do we need an NGO that has multi-$100,000 salaries and billions of dollars and is getting all these contracts? Because once you get to a certain bigness, you're probably going to lose your mission at some point.
I mean, I wish that wasn't the case, but it typically is. And yeah, I call it ivory tower conservation. But again, I don't even use that term with the Nature Conservancy. They're not a conservation group. They're a working lands management NGO corporation. And I agree with you about ranchers and even loggers. I actually respect it when somebody's like, listen, we want to cut these trees down because of a financial windfall and benefit. I'm like, all right, maybe I disagree with you, but you are being honest. You are saying, here are trees, this is a way to make money. Maybe you're ignoring some pieces, fine. But what you're not saying is, oh, look, by us taking, we're actually giving. That is the most destructive mentality that I can imagine. I'm going to write a piece specifically about that because that's become pretty much the whole thing. So it's not enough for people to say, okay, let's say you want to hunt. I don't personally hunt. I don't have a problem with people who hunt for food. But when they're saying, okay, well, I'm going to kill the best genetics buck and that's helping the herd, I don't believe that. I don't think that's true. I think we have to acknowledge that we have a footprint. All of us being alive have a footprint. These bookcases are made of wood. I didn't build the bookcases, but whatever. I acknowledge that. But I'm not pretending, you're welcome, Forrest, for having built the bookcases, because you go down that train of thinking, you do a little destruction, it's actually good. Well, more destruction's even better. And then these people kind of lose their minds. And I think that's where we are with the Nature Conservancy, where all of this is just being subverted, which is why anytime I see an actual commercial timber sale on public lands, I'm like, thank God. I'm like, thank God they're actually admitting it. But it's almost never that. They're always, oh, it's a fuel reduction and oh, it's restoring, blah, blah, blah. It's like they know they can't get away with that. And that shows that what they're doing is not right. So let's accept that we as humans are sometimes going to do things that are impactful. There's going to be a footprint. Let's acknowledge the footprint so we can limit the footprint. We're not even admitting the facts of this stuff. And that's what makes it so frustrating to me and so many others. And there are some larger conservation groups that are engaging on this to a certain degree. And I'm going to mention them because I believe in saying good things when good things happen. So, Center for Biological Diversity, even though I don't agree with all their stances on all the stuff, I think is doing some good work on this, calling attention to some of this, including here in Colorado. There's an entity called Environment America, so they have Environment Colorado. I don't know what they're doing in other states, but here in Colorado, they're at least paying it a little attention. I mean, they have a gigantic budget, and we're talking about maybe a couple dozen hours. I'll take it, right? Like that's better than nothing. Wild Earth Guardians, which isn't a huge organization but is sizable, is also weighing in on this stuff. But what's ironic is that, like, I mean, it's like people like me, people like you, people who are working on either a shoestring or no budget or like paying to do this work. We're the ones who are like, I have to write these the comments for the blue book for this ballot measure. I'm like, why am I doing this? This is above my pay grade and my knowledge grade. I'm like, how about you all six-figure salary people? And they're often like absent. But I'm learning sometimes that for some of the big groups, it's almost better that they be absent than coming in there and ruining it in the. So it's almost like count your blessings when they're silent.
Yeah, I mean it's difficult. Like the Caldor restoration plan, it's 156,000 acres, and I think that they ended up doing it under emergency order, so our comments matter not anyway. But we only managed to get 16 people to comment on this massive restoration plan, and not one of them was from a major environmental group here in California.
Yeah.
That's very disappointing. It is very disappointing. We do have a couple chapters of our Sierra Club here. We have Stop Clear Cutting California.
Yes.
They are a Sierra Club chapter that is doing amazing work. They put out webinars every month. They have great people on there. They're doing good work.
100%. I will endorse that as well.
Sure. And we have the California Chaparral Institute. They do great things, but we need more help and more people commenting on these localized plans. So, it's really important that you're engaged with your local agencies, and it's really hard. Usually, you only have like a 2-week window to comment on these projects, especially if they're done under the emergency orders. You really don't get a lot of time for input. They're clearly not announcing it to the world. But anything that we can do to get people more engaged on that commenting level, at least it's in the record and stuff, because that's what we've noticed here too, is that there's some of us that are working really hard and trying to spread ourselves very thin, and not getting a lot of help from some of the bigger groups out there.
Right. Commenting and grassroots organizing, which these ivory tower groups don't do anymore. So you're talking to actual local people and just raising a stink, whether or not they're commenting. I mean, they should definitely comment. We solicit folks to comments, all that stuff. But the community conversation, the debate and dialogue, that's as important, if not more so, the culture. And these big environmental groups tend to not engage. They're not grassroots groups. So, but the good news is that some of us are doing other things, and there's something that is about to be officially launched called New Direction for Public Lands. And it's folks who are basically joining together the grassroots groups that have strong stances to kind of be like a big green of grassroots. So we can actually compete with what these other folks. So I'm really excited about that. And I know you've been affiliated, and Eco Integrity Alliance is affiliated. So that may turn the tides. That's what we need to do. We need to all come together. We don't have to agree on everything. That's really not necessary. But the general gist of, we're not a fan of what's going on in public lands right now. We're not just going to defend the status quo. That is such a losing battle. That is, I wouldn't say a waste of time, but fighting for just holding a line that keeps getting pushed back further and further. No, thank you. Like, we're advancing. And yeah, just a couple other pieces I just want to throw in since we're talking about California, and to get your take on it. And then we'll get into the last question. But yeah, I mean, California is an example of places where they keep, see, well, the Paradise Fire, the LA fires, if they had only logged, like you said, they logged the hell out of
Yeah.
paradise. And it can be argued, some are argued that the amount of logging there actually opened up the forest to wind, which spread the embers faster. So,
Yeah, and my hobby for probably like 2 decades now has been listening to the fire scanners when we have these major events here in California. I don't work. I sit here. Well, I mean, I do work obviously, but I sit at home, and when there's one of these major events, I will listen to the scanner traffic, read every single Cal Fire report from beginning to end, and try to really track and see what happens. And you can hear it time and time again, and you can pinpoint where they are during these events. And when the firefighters are struggling the most is often during in these thin strands, and where these projects were already done, and they will say it clearly. There is nothing that you can do to stop a fire during a wind driven event. You can't. When the atmosphere is exceptionally dry and we are in drought conditions and you have Santa Ana winds, there is nothing you can do to stop that fire. And all we're doing is putting people at risk, putting them out in the wilderness to accomplish nothing. And if we keep drying out our forests, it's only going to get worse and worse and worse. And
right.
they don't want to admit it. They don't want to say it, and it's a lot to go through, a lot of reports. But the only reason that the Caldor fire did not burn down South Lake Tahoe was because we had a drastic shift in wind conditions that day. It Within a 3-day period, the winds and the humidity level came up at the same time that the winds dropped significantly. And within 3 days, both the Caldor fire and the horrific Dixie fire were both basically out within that 3-day period, simply because um, the wind and the weather shifted.
Yeah.
And I mean, all the evidence is there. The boots on the ground guys, they know, and they're terrified. And even the agencies themselves constantly say, the head of the Western Fire Chiefs Association, they clearly said that the best thing that cities and agencies and states can do in the face of our rapidly changing climate and these fire conditions is to enforce and facilitate home and infrastructure hardening.
Yes.
That's the best thing that we can do, and it's really the only thing that we can do. So,
Yeah. No, there's no question about that. Unfortunately, they'll exploit every single tragedy, even if it's just going to make things more dangerous for people. And so they just drop these firefighters into this backcountry area in Colorado at the edge of the Utah border. And unfortunately, tragically, three of them died. So the question is, not about the bravery of the firefighters, just why are they being sent into the middle of nowhere? So this was actually in these wild natural areas, nowhere near any human habitation. They dropped them in there, and it was severe fire weather. And of course, people are like, oh, mitigation. It's like, number one, wouldn't work. Number two, you don't mitigate out in the middle of nowhere. That would be a foolish thing, even if it was effective. But they're going to use it. I guarantee you. They're going to be like, "Oh, our firefighters just died, so let's do more things to, frankly, put them more at risk in our communities." It is a kind of, it is a kind of madness, and
it
that's why I'm
really is.
so.
No, it really is. And like if you think about like the Caldor fire in particular, because it's the one that's right in my backyard, we are 5 years on from the fire, and they've done massive amounts of salvage logging, which is the most destructive. This ecosystem is perfectly fine after a fire, and then they come through and destroy it. But we still have people that are living in RVs, like 700 people still out of their homes. Their entire community was destroyed. They're still living in RVs with large families and trying to find places to park these RVs, because you're not even allowed to park them on your own property unless you remove even more trees from your property. We have kids that are traveling 2 hours on a school bus to get to school because their school has not been rebuilt 5 years later. just last year they finally got their post office rebuilt after lobbying Congress for 4 years. So there are so many funds being thrown at clearing this forest and replanting this forest, which has already burned and is recovering quite beautifully on its own. Not recovering. I don't like that word because it's not recovering. It's
Mm-mm.
This is what the forest is supposed to do. It is starting fresh, and it's a new beginning for this forest. It's a beautiful thing. So we're going to spend billions of dollars to restore the forest when people are still living in RVs and their kids are traveling 2 hours one way, by the way, to get to school. It's pretty sad.
Yeah, no, that's really awful. And then they're also taking all of the forest stuff and extrapolating it to, these grassland fires. So the Marshall Fire here in Colorado, which was our most destructive fire, was in grasslands and residential area. It wasn't even in forests. The LA fires, and there's this study I have from UCLA, expert perspective, wildland fuels management would not have saved us from the January 2025 LA fire. So that's in chaparral, which is more shrub than forest. So it's just really alarming. Again, it's the story. They have this story. You're going to die unless we do this stuff. Even if it's the opposite of true, it's a compelling story to people. So I think our goal is to continue to interface with people. Sadly, the more greedy folks get, like the Nature Conservancy and the agencies, the more this is going to be visible to people, the more the destruction is going to be apparent, and more of how ineffective it is going to become more and more clear. So they are basically, you know, they're shooting themselves in the foot. It's going to take a little bit longer, but I am seeing a shift in how people are perceiving this. And yeah, well, so yeah, this has been great. I wanted to talk to you about some of your other work. I think I'm going to have you back another time because you work with bears, and I want to talk to you about that. But I think we should save that for its own discussion because that's important enough to have its own.
Yeah, I would love to talk about our bears here. California Department of Fish and Wildlife likes to unalive them too. So it's there's a lot of issues going on. I would love to come back and talk about that. Yeah, I agree with you that we're making progress finally. We've seen a lot of engagement from our community, a lot of people writing their own letters to the editor. We've got this small group of people. It's called healthytahoe.org. I'm not really sure who they are, but they're putting together yard signs to get to people to really push back against this thinning herbicide thing. So, yeah, I think takes a lot of us and it's taken a lot of time. But this is the time to do it. Everybody knows with what the administration is doing in all of our public lands. People are really upset about the roadless rule. They're really upset about what's happening in our wilderness areas across the southern border. Um, Now is the time to get people involved. So I sound frustrated most of the time, but I am actually probably more hopeful than I have ever been as an environmentalist that people are starting to see the problems. Data centers have really gotten a lot of people's attention. So I am hopeful and positive that we are making progress and that we are going to make an impact with these agencies. I love living in Lake Tahoe because it is an international tourist destination. So if we can make change here, we have our regional planning agency. We're going to have meetings with them to hopefully ban the use of herbicides completely in the Lake Tahoe basin. Um, they're used on a lot of people's lawns and stuff. So we are making progress and I am feeling hopeful and yeah, looking forward to the future.
Yeah, no, as agitated as I got today talking about the Nature Conservancy, I am hopeful as well. And yeah, thanks to folks like you. So let's get into the last question. So I like to ask people what they believe to be a root cause of the eco crisis. So what do you think? What's something potentially at the root of all these issues we're trying to address?
Well, I mean, obviously capitalism is the big thing that everybody wants to look at. Like we have allowed corporations to become more important than life itself at this point, and I think that is a big issue. However, I really think that it comes down to the fact that the vast majority of people in positions of power are incredibly detached from the land itself. And that most of us, even in our day to day lives, are not experiencing what actual nature looks like. We have this shifting baseline of we've been watching these things change so slowly over many, many decades that we don't notice how messed up it really is out there. We don't, things look normal to us and they're really not. And I think that the most important thing that we can do in these times. And the biggest problem that we have right now is that people just simply don't spend enough time on their hands and their knees in the dirt looking at what's out there, smelling what mycelium smells like and seeing what insects live under your porch or anything to get yourself reconnected with nature and to remember that without all of that out there, we can't survive. We can't live without any of it. And frankly, I don't really want to. So, yeah, I think that's our biggest issue right now is that we as human beings do not have the time in our day to day lives to experience the nature in the way that we should. And it's important that we find little ways, even if it's 5 minutes during the day, to appreciate anything, even if you live in the inner city, any flower growing through a crack in the sidewalk. Just get out there and remember that you are part of something more than yourself and your job and your immediate life.
Makes perfect sense to me. Well, thank you so much, Melissa, for coming on the Green Root podcast and for all your work.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Anytime, I'm happy to come back.
Perfect.